In this video we'll be adjusting the primary or front chain on the Matchless G3L WD, and since that involves adjusting the rear chain as well, we'll be doing that. First we remove the inspection cap within the chain case, and this allows us to see the bottom of the primary chain, and we can put a screwdriver in there and see how much slack or chain width there is. Now there should be a 3/8 of an inch at its tightest point, which is about 9 millimeters. Now, it's perfectly possible to do this with the outer chain case still fitted, and that's what I would do day to day, but because of another job I had to do on the bike, I was taking the chain case off anyway, and that helps with this video because it will allow you to see the chain tightening as I'm making the various adjustments. But just to emphasize, you don't need to take the chain case off in order to do this. However, if you do want to take the chain case off to get a better view, then I have done a video to show you how to do that and replace it. So here's a better view of things with the chain case off, and you can see immediately how slack that primary chain is. By the way, it's dipping at the top there. The next thing is I'm going to remove the spark plug, and we do this because it allows us an easy way to turn the transmission, and by doing that we'll be able to see how the chain tension varies at different points. Pop the bike into second gear. Now we're going to measure the slack, and when we do this we need to do it at the same point each time, and we need a reference of where the chain is, which is why I was pointing at that split link there. So I'm always going to measure it at the bottom, and I'm going to use the split link to remember where the chain is so that we can reference ourselves to the tightest point in the chain, which is where we should be getting 3/8 of an inch of chain width or slack. So you can see this part of the chain is really slack, but then as we move things around it gets progressively tighter. When that little silver link is at about the 5 o'clock on the clutch basket, that's the tightest point, and that's the bit we need to get right. Now the way we adjust the tension is by the rather curious method of moving the whole gearbox away from the front of the engine. This is the bottom fixing bolt. There's also a top fixing bolt, and both need to be loosened. And here's the top fixing bolt, which is much easier to access. Now we move the gearbox by adjusting the eye bolt, first of all by undoing the locking nut here. Now the aim here is to just rotate this anti-clockwise and create a little bit of slack. About 1/8 of an inch is good. And this shows how we're going to pivot the gearbox from the circle at the bottom from right to left as you look at it. And we do that by turning in the adjuster nut here clockwise, and that will draw the gearbox from right to left as you look at it and away from the crankcase of the engine, tightening the chain. And if you watch the lower part of the chain here carefully, you'll see it tightening as I make the adjustment. Now I'm going to nip up the adjuster nut and then check the chain tension with a ruler. And checking at the tightest point of the chain, by reference to that little silver split link, we find we've got 3/8 of an inch, which is just right. And while I'm on this side of the bike, I just wanted to show you that by moving the gearbox further away from the crankshaft, we've actually created a lot of slack in the drive chain, which we're going to have to address. And any time you adjust the primary, you must adjust the drive chain. But before we do that, we'll finish what we started by nipping up the top fixing bolt and the bottom fixing bolt, so the gearbox can't move anymore. Now, adjusting the rear chain tension is pretty easy, so I'll run through this quickly. Undo the right wheel nut, or loosen it rather, and then the left wheel nut. And then we'll turn our attention to the adjusters. With a smaller spanner, just undo the lock nut. And then to make the chain tighter, we will wind the adjuster clockwise so it pushes the wheel further away from the front of the bike. Now, if you've got your rear wheel carefully aligned, then you can keep it aligned by just making sure that any turn you do is equal on the right and the left. If it's not, it's easy enough to put a piece of wood alongside the tyre and align it again later. And if you look at the bottom of the chain carefully here, you can clearly see it tightening as I make the adjustment. Now I'll put the bike into neutral so that you can rotate the wheel easily. And using the split link as a reference point and measuring as accurately as you can from the middle of the chain, measure the chain width or the slack. And it should be between 3/8 and ½ an inch. And that measurement should be at the tightest point on the chain. And once you're happy with it, nip up the adjusters. Now, unlike a modern bike, this is actually much easier because there's no suspension to compress. So even when the bike's on its stand, what you see is what you get with the chain tension. Sometimes, however, there's a little bit of movement when you tighten the spindle axle nuts. So you do need to check it after you've tightened everything up. The other thing to note is that the speedo unit on the right hand side of the bike, whenever you undo that axle nut, it tends to just droop down, and that makes the cable go a little bit lower. So as you tighten that nut on the right hand side, just use your finger to position the speedo in the position you want it. So that was primary chain adjustment and rear chain adjustment. I hope you found that useful. If I've made any mistakes or if you've got better ways of doing things, then do please let me know and I will change the video. Until then, here's a summary of all the steps, and safe riding.